Hello, listeners. Welcome to Marie Lives the Horror. This is episode 25 of the series of True Paranormal Ghost Stories. In tonight's episode, an ancient piece of literature infests a home with paranormal visitors. We hear a tale of an apartment haunting located in a part of New York City with a very dark history. And an interesting story of a ghostly presence who has routinely visited a home for over 20 years. So without further ado, step into my horror chamber as we live the horror together. Number 1. Freemason's Book from 1872. I'll start off by saying I'm currently 28 years old and have had roughly a dozen previous encounters with the paranormal before this haunting happened. People have quite often said maybe I have something about me that attracts the paranormal, or I'm able to pick it up on it easier than others. Anyway, on to the story. So I had just moved back to my hometown in December 2019 from living out in British Columbia, Canada. I stayed with a family member for 6 weeks when I got back, as it wasn't the most ideal situation. I moved from that place to my best buddy's house in mid-January 2020. My friend and I are avid fans of looking into the paranormal and learning about the Freemasons, New World Order, and things of that nature. Pre-COVID-19, we loved going to the flea markets in the city and would go every weekend. We went shortly after I moved into his basement. There was an old book there in a glass case for $300 that caught his eye. It was a Freemasons encyclopedia, circa 1872. He hummed and awed at the idea of buying it and regretted not buying it after we had left. The next weekend, he still had his mind wrapped around buying that book. So we went back and he purchased it. We brought it back into his house and he cracked the seal open and there laid a note on the first page that read, "Passed down from my beloved father in 1919, with a signature. We didn't think much of this at the time. Fast forward to the next night. I was downstairs in my room getting settled for bed. He had put the Freemasons book in the basement the night before in a glass cabinet in the common room. I had a roll of foam standing up in my room next to my dresser. I had just had sat on my bed, and from the corner of my eye, I saw it slowly start to lean and then fall over. Now, I didn't think too much of this still. I turned off the light and went to bed. Okay, fast forward 2 days. I'm coming home from work. The time is 7 p.m. I get to my buddy's house. No one is home. So I go down to my room, and as I'm getting undressed, that same roll of foam literally goes flying with force into some boxes I had in the room and moves them. At this point, I start thinking there's something up. So I tell my friend about what happened, and he thinks the book we bought might have something to do with it. I should also add here that before we had brought this book into his house, he had told me about things moving on their own in his place previously. His friends have witnessed it. We know that an older man had died in one of the upstairs bedrooms before his parents bought the house. We thought perhaps the book had bad energy and may have pissed off the spirit of that man that was already in the house. So this is where things get really hairy. Again, a few days later, coming home from work, my friend had moved the book upstairs this same morning, but I didn't know that at the time. I came around back like I always did and unlocked the back door. His dog was there waiting for me. A couple feet behind the dog was a ball. As I was looking at the ball, it started to roll backwards down the hallway and did a complete circle and dead stopped near the dog's dishes on the floor. My heart stopped. I was frozen with fear at this point. I got the courage after a few minutes to walk in that area and sit on the living room couch. I quickly texted my friend and told him what happened. He texted back and informed me he had moved the book upstairs beside the Christmas tree and fireplace. I looked up and it was sitting there staring at me on top of some books where he said it was. The ball had stopped right at the dog's bowls, which was exactly where he had placed the book. I quickly hopped up and went down to the basement. As I was down there, I sat on the couch and listened. All of a sudden, this massive bang came from upstairs. I was alone with the dogs. Like someone had just jumped up and down on the floor. The dog went nuts, like someone or something was in the house. I immediately ran upstairs and saw the recycling bin all over the kitchen floor. I was quite shocked now. So I left the house and went to my car outside and just sat. I called one of my other buddies, and he told me to put a Bible on top of the book. So I went back in, found the Bible, and did just that. So the friend that gave me the info about putting the Bible on top, he actually wanted to buy the book from us. Not sure exactly why. That same day I was at work, and the friend I was living with called me. He told me he had this record in his collection that had some pretty gruesome cover art with Jesus' head on a platter. He said he was in the basement, hanging out, and that record pulled out of the shelf on him when he wasn't looking, and said it was strategically pulled out, so it was just showing Jesus' decapitated head on the platter. This really freaked him out, and he wanted to get rid of the book. My other friend just so happened he wanted to buy it, so he came over and gave him $200 for it. Then immediately started looking through the book with me standing right there. I hadn't looked at it yet, and nor did I want to at this point. This stuff that was in that book was no joke, extremely satanic in nature. There was all sorts of pentagrams displayed. The as above, so below imagery was in there, and full detail as well. Gates of hell for those that don't know. Some pretty grim things in that book. Demons no doubt have been hiding in there. That night, he left with the book. We ended up smudging his house the day after and saying some prayers throughout the smudge. That seemed to work well. Fast forward about 2 weeks. We were gaming in the common room, and it was silent in the basement. Nothing running, just the PS4. So we go upstairs to make food and come back down after we're done eating. I go down first and notice the bathroom fan had been switched on. I asked my buddy, and he said he hadn't been down there. So I was like, great. Nothing happens for about a week. I'm in my room in the basement, home by myself, just the dogs upstairs and the cats in the basement. The downstairs bathroom was located right beside my room. So I'm sitting there just gaming on my day off, and out of nowhere, I hear bang, 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 bang. Very loud bangs. I immediately froze and thought of the recycling bin from a few weeks earlier. I got up, went upstairs, because it sounded like the cupboards were being banged together. I went up and looked, and nothing out of the ordinary. My friend was just getting home. He came in and I told him what had just happened and asked if he could check the basement. I told him it sounded like cupboards. He went down and immediately called for me to come down to the bathroom. So I got there, and all of the bathroom cupboard doors under the sink were all flung open. We thought we had got rid of this. So we smudged and blessed the house once more. After the second smudging of the house, nothing seemed to happen for the remainder of the time I was there. It felt clean with positive energy flowing through. I moved out in late March 2020 and haven't heard of anything happening there since. My conclusion there was definitely something negative inside that book. Demon? Maybe. Who knows? I'm just glad it's over. Number 2. Roosevelt Island Haunting. Warning. Long story. When I was a sophomore in college, I lived in an apartment in New York City on Roosevelt Island, which is nestled between Manhattan and Queens. The island has a dark history, and at one point there were insane asylums and a smallpox hospital. It's actually pretty fascinating if you want to Wikipedia it. But with all of that suffering, the island seems to still carry that burden. So our apartment was laid out in sort of an L shape. The living room / dining room faced part of the hallway. There was a bedroom at the end of the hall that was small and led to the 2 bedrooms, one of which had a balcony off of it. I'm not gonna lie, we had a killer view, and for a dorm, we felt like we were living pretty large. But not long after we moved in, my 3 roommates and I all began to experience some different things. It started with the feeling like we were being watched all the time. I remember specifically, I was home alone and working on a mural, art student, and I began to feel very uneasy, like someone was right behind me the whole time, watching me. This went on for about an hour, and I just couldn't shake this feeling, but did my best to just roll with it. But I'll admit it, I was scared. I was relieved when my roommates got home. As the semester continued, my roommate and I had a huge project due, and in order to accommodate all the space we needed to do it, we took turns working in the living room. I worked on my project first, and then headed to bed as my roommate worked on hers. I was laying in my bed reading with my back to the door when I saw a shadow come up on my book, and I felt like someone was behind me. Thinking it was my roommate, I turned to see what she wanted, and she wasn't there. I shrugged it off and kept reading. The shadow once again crept up on my book. I moved my blankets, my head, and the shadow didn't move. At this point, I was scared, but felt ridiculous if I mentioned it. So I pulled the covers over my head and just went to sleep. Fast forward to Halloween. We had a party and a bunch of friends were over. As the night wore on, we started talking about ghosts and spooky stuff, and lo and behold, it comes up about how everyone thinks our place is a little spooky. My roommate starts to tell a story about how one night we had a project due and we took turns. I'm like, where is she going with this? She says she was working on her project and she saw someone out of the corner of her eye walking in the hallway. So she gets up thinking it's me, and it turns out I'm asleep. She goes back to do her project, and she feels someone come up on her. All the hairs on the back of her neck stand up, and once again, no one is there. Now at this point, I had never mentioned to her what happened to me that same night. I told her my story, and we both were in shock. The more we talked, a few people mentioned feeling like they were going to get pushed off the balcony every time they went out there. And then it comes out that two of our friends had the exact same dream when they slept over. They were paralyzed and began floating, and then began to uncontrollably spin. At this point, I'm convinced something is happening. Sometime later, I began to start seeing a shadow figure often out of the corner of my eye in the hallway. It was dark with no features, and I only ever saw it out of the corner of my eye, as it quickly darted when I would look full on. I convinced myself it was just my eyes until my friend was over. We were sitting at the table talking when I got distracted for a second because I saw it. So I took a pause in the conversation, and when I looked at my friend, she said, "I saw it." I said, "Saw what?" And she replied, "That black thing in the hallway." I had never told her I saw it before, so I felt totally vindicated. The pinnacle of my experiences happened when it was winter break. My roommates had left to go home, and I was the last one there. Not wanting to be alone, I called a friend to stay. We were talking about going out, so I went into the bathroom to brush my teeth. The door was open because we were still talking. When there was a pause in our conversation, I heard a voice, plain as day, whisper my name loudly, directly into my ear. At this point, I visibly freaked out. I confirmed with my friend that she said nothing, and we decided to leave the apartment for a while. During winter break, I had contacted a few paranormal teams who wanted to check it out after I relayed my story. When we got back from break, I told my roommates, and they were not at all interested and acted like I was nuts, though we all had experiences. I regret to this day not just letting them come. So I went to a church, got holy water, sprinkled my apartment, and said aloud, "This is my apartment, and you're scaring me. That is not okay, and you need to go." After that, I didn't feel much of a presence, but maybe I just believed what I did worked and learned to ignore it. I'll never know. Number 3. A night stalker I can't escape. I don't even know where to begin, but my roommate and I are being haunted. It all started when we first moved into our apartment. I was doing laundry and at this point had done multiple loads since moving in. When pulling out the laundry from the washer, I heard a clink at the bottom. At the bottom was a small pendant of the Virgin Mary. Neither me or my roommate had ever seen it. I set it aside and didn't think much of it. Soon after, though, we would hear the dryer door pop and slowly open. It creeped us out, but we didn't think much of it and blamed it on a faulty door. This continued on many more times. As time went on, even the washer would turn on and begin to fill on its own. A month or so later after moving in, the TV in the living room would turn off and on randomly. Then one night, closing my eyes to go to sleep, my TV turned on. After being annoyed, I yelled, "If you think this is funny, do it again." I hadn't even finished the sentence before the TV turned back on. Right after, there was a bang on the wall. The wall is shared with a spare bedroom we have that is not currently occupied. The coincidence of it all had me very creeped out, but I convinced myself that the neighbors must have a similar TV that is interfering. Though still very freaked, my roommate and I decided to sleep in the living room. During the night, I awoke to a figure standing in the corner of the room. I could see the outline of the person due to a nightlight behind it. I tried to speak to wake my roommate, but couldn't due to fear. She, though, all of a sudden jumped up and ran over to the nightlight in anger, ripping it out, complaining it was too bright. I was in dismay as I was trying to tell her, "Don't," because the shadow figure was standing over there. This next story is from my roommate. She has the master bedroom of the apartment that has a private bathroom. It was late at night, and she was in bed reading and cuddling with her cat. She had even sent me a Snapchat of the two of them cuddling. She decided to call it a night and had gotten up to use the bathroom before going to bed. While in the bathroom, she heard her bedroom door begin to shake. She was freaked out that someone was trying to break in and grabbed a bat. To open her door, she had to first move a box fan and then unlock the door. When she finally opened it, she found her cat on the other side. There was no explanation as to how she got out there. As time went on, things got more scary as the knocks began happening every night, along with the sound of something being thrown at my door. We later began finding mysterious wine corks outside my door, which explained the noise, but not how they got there. One night I came home late from a friend's house. I thought I was home alone because my roommate's keys weren't hanging up by the door, and her room was silent with no fan on. Like I said before, she normally has it on. I had just turned the lights off and was laying in bed when in the spare room I could hear what sounded like the pump for the air mattress had turned on. It was extremely loud and I could hear footsteps in the hallway outside my door. Next, through the crack of my door, I could see a bright light shining back and forth, as if there was a flashlight or if someone had the light on their phone on. My first thought was someone again had broken in and I had my phone ready to call 911. I heard the person exhale deeply, and then everything went quiet. I finally got brave enough to open the door and was opening the door to the spare room when I see the TV in the living room turn on. It begins to loudly play a creepy soundtrack with no actual video. I run and quickly rip the plug out of the wall. The next day, I notice on Netflix, the first thing that pops up was Unsolved Mysteries. The music was very similar to what I heard the night before. Even more weird, the show skipped to episode 3, which was called House of Terror. The next evening, we decided to be brave and sleep in the spare room to experience what was happening in there. Again, the mysterious knocking was heard from the same wall which I heard from my room. While laying in the dark in the living room, we begin to hear the same creepy music we heard the night before. We go out to look, and nothing seemed to be turned on. So we begin to go back to sleep when we hear in the living room again the voice of a little girl. My roommate and I both looked at each other in disbelief of what we heard. There was a moment of silence between the girl talking, but again we started to hear her talk. It sounded like she was coming from a speaker, but she was echoing. There was no other voices but her own. At the end, we finally could understand what she was saying. She said,
"Are you afraid of the dark?"
We both froze with complete fear. At this point, we have tried saging the apartment many times, but never seemed to help, just making it come back worse. One evening, the knocking kept happening in my room, and my anxiety kept rising, so I decided to bring the air mattress into my roommate's room. Again, I was about to fall asleep when I feel something hit me. Freaked out because that it was something big. I soon realized it was one of my roommate's hair ties. What creeped me out the most was that I could tell it was dropped straight above me, which was impossible. After I calmed down and was finally relaxing, I felt a hard tug on my foot, as if something was trying to yank me out of bed. It was at this point I felt a new level of horror. This could throw things and grab me. What else was it capable of? The next day, I focused a lot on my Christian religion and prayer, a lot to God for protection and for guardian angels. I placed a crucifix above my door in hopes of extra protection. That night, my roommate decided to camp in my room to experience what I had been going through. As normal, almost like a nightly routine, the sound of something being thrown at my door happened with nothing outside to explain it. Before falling asleep that night, we searched my room to make sure there was no hair ties to be found in my room. While laying there, again, I felt something hit my back, and then the sheets. It was loud enough for both of us to hear it. I couldn't believe it. Again, it was a hair tie. I was frozen in complete shock. I thought I was going crazy. After settling down once again, I felt something wrap itself around my ankle with a cold grip. At this moment, I felt like I was being targeted and was not going to be a part of whatever this thing had planned. The next day, I went full force with saging and using Santo Palo to cleanse the place. I placed salt in every corner of the apartment. I used anointed oil from Jerusalem on every door, window, and mirror. I prayed like I never prayed before to get rid of this negative energy. Things were pretty quiet for a few days, and I held out hope that this was finally over. Until I was sitting on my bed, today, home alone. I all of a sudden felt a horrible burning pain on my back. It felt as if someone was putting out a cigarette on my back. I jumped up and ripped my shirt off, thinking a bug was biting me. I ran into the bathroom and couldn't see anything until 3 scratch marks started to appear. I could not believe what I was seeing. I feel as if I'm being stalked by something I cannot see. I am helpless and don't know what to do at this point. I am open to any help I can find. Help me. I'm haunted. Number 4. Black figure standing in the garden every night. So this experience I had dates back to the second house I lived in. When I was about 13, my nan moved in with us following my granddad's death, and with the sale of the 2 houses, we managed to move into a fairly big house with a massive garden. Just to put it into perspective, our neighbor's garden and house in a previous time was a small tennis club with 3 courts and wrapped around the back of our garden. Just to give a perspective of the size of these gardens. So anyway, my bedroom was sort of attached and above the garage to the side of the house, so I used to be able to see across my neighbor's garden and the gardens next door to theirs, while also being sort of detached from the rest of the house. Anyway, we lived there for 5 years and nothing really happened. I went to uni and had some experiences, which I have posted on another post. When I returned from uni, I picked up the dirty habit of smoking and not wanting my parents to know I used to climb out my window on the roof of a shelter we had outside my window, and I would sit and smoke. When I was back for the summer after my first year, I was on this roof and I heard our neighbor's dog bark and go ballistic. He wasn't in the garden, but obviously by their back door. At the same time, their automatic backlight sensor switched the light on, and clear as day, there was a black, and I mean real black figure in their garden. Maybe around 5'10", looked like a man's figure, just pacing up and down their deck, almost right below me. I initially shit myself, thinking it was the husband, and for sure he had seen me smoking. I looked closer, frozen still, and nothing what I was seeing was almost hovering, gliding effortlessly, not a walk. Suddenly, their back door opened and the husband came out with the dog, and just like that, it vanished. I continued to see Steve out there, and the exact same routine occurred. This was almost every other night. I even kept a log of all the times looking for some sort of pattern. One night shortly after, around 8 weeks, my parents had a barbecue and my neighbors came. I brought this up with the gentleman's wife, who looked at me and laughed. She proceeded to tell me the shadow's name was Steve. Steve has been in their house for the last 20 years, and she regularly sees him pacing the garden, walking down the stairs, opening and closing doors and cupboards, moving their possessions, almost like living as if they were not there. Her kids had seen him and grew up with him, but her husband had never ever seen him. I was shook, but glad at the same time I wasn't going crazy. I continued to see Steve right until we moved out of the house a few years ago. If anything, I felt sad for him. It was almost like he was unable to move on. Number 5. Ghost in the house. I'm not too sure how to get this started, so fuck it, let's begin. When I was little, my family and I lived in this small house on the outskirts of Houston. The way the house was laid out was you would walk in from the front door, and to your left was the kitchen and breakfast nook. Forward was the living room with the dining area behind it, and to your right was a long hallway that led to my 2 brothers' rooms, my parents' room, and my room. My mom raised us Catholic and blessed our house regularly, and my dad as well was very superstitious. The house itself was somewhat old, being built in like the 60s or 70s. Anyways, my first experience in the house happened when I was around maybe 5 or 6. Since I was born, I always had my own room, and my 2 brothers shared a room which was right next to mine. One night, I woke up needing to pee really bad. The bathroom was located right in the center of the long-ass hallway. It was in the middle of the night, so the hallway was pitch black. The only light source was my series of nightlights. I stood at the end of the hallway, staring towards the living room. I remember a feeling of intense fear, and seeing a tall, dark figure crouch down and move towards me. I screamed, waking literally every person in the house. That night, about a year after, I always slept in my parents' room. As the years went by, my older brother and I started experiencing things that no one else was, except our family dog. We seemed to notice. It was always little things. Doors would open and slam shut. A TV would turn off and on, and we could hear walking in the attic. My dad would try to explain to us that the footsteps in the attic were from raccoons. Being kids, we believed it was raccoons, because why would Dad lie about it? We found out years later he only told us that to keep us and himself from getting scared. So one day, my mom and dad were at work, leaving my 2 big brothers and myself alone in the house. My brothers were outside playing basketball, and I was inside watching TV. I was about 8 or 9 at the time. The TV randomly switched to the static channel. I flipped the channel back to what I was watching, ignoring the sudden creep of fear crawling up my spine. The TV switched back again, and I turned it off. From where I was sitting, I could almost see the end of the hallway, and felt that something was there in my brother's room. I got up, walked to the hallway, and stared down at my brother's door. The doorknob turned, and I froze. I was the only one inside the house, yet I felt I wasn't alone. The door cracked open, and when it did, it felt like the hallway darkened. I bolted outside to get my brothers. I told them what happened, and when they went inside to check it out, I remember both of them running out and telling me that we're going to play basketball until our parents got home. About a year later was the scariest moment shared by my brother and I. We had a sudden falling out with my dad's side of the family. My grandma was sick and dying at the time, which was causing a lot of animosity in my family. One night, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing a creepy face in my closet, which was keeping me from being able to turn the light off and go to sleep. I had this sudden feeling that I needed to look outside. I slept under a window that overlooked the backyard. My brother had the same window in their room. I summoned up all my courage and glanced out the window. It was in the middle of the night, and the backyard was lit only by moonlight. However, we had a yellow slide that stuck out even in the darkness. I stared out for a little bit until I noticed something sitting on the slide. The figure on the slide had its knees drawn up, with its arms wrapped around its legs, long bird-like wings, and a long beak. The figure was so dark, so pitch black, it stood out even in the darkened backyard. The thing opened its eyes, which were blood red, and lifted its head quickly to stare at the window next to mine, where my brother was. And after about a minute, it slowly turned to stare at my window. When it did, it felt like a sharp icicle went through my soul. I screamed for my dad. He went outside to look, and nothing was there. That morning, my dad got the call that my grandma had passed away in the night. After that day, things on my dad's side went from bad to ugly. Old, horrible secrets came out, and my brother started to act out, while I became more timid and sleep-deprived. It wasn't until years later that we had moved to another house and were practically grown that we spoke about that night. We were smoking a blunt, talking about scary things that happened in our old house. Like my dad would wake up to something standing over him a lot, and we would hear things in the attic. Spooky shit. I told him about the demon bird thing, and he turned super pale. He explained in detail what the creature looked like. Things that I never told my parents. It clicked to me that whatever that thing was made direct eye contact with my brother, and when it turned to me, I screamed. My other brother tried to tell us that we were just fucked up and watched too many scary stories, but I know what I saw. He saw it too. I haven't had too many paranormal encounters after that, just a few here and there. But I'll always think back to that one night. That one scary-ass night. I still wonder, nearly 20 years have passed since I saw that creature. What it was, and why it was in our backyard. Hello, listeners. Thank you for watching tonight's episode of True Paranormal Ghost Stories as you live the horror with me. If you have a story that you would like to be featured in a future episode, check the description down below and send them over to my email. Do not forget to subscribe and click the notification bell to keep up with future episodes. Thanks for listening. I am your host, Marie Lives the Horror.